record this, but it might be easier. All right. So I'll get us started knowing we've got a few minutes and some announcements while other folks begin to join. But thank you all for coming to this month's peer exchange. We're talking about accessory dwelling units today, and we're joined by Ashley Chambers, the housing manager of the city of Grand Junction, and Matt Lafferty, the principal planner for Larimer County. So today's agenda, we'll do a few announcements, give you some updates on what's coming grant-wise, webinar-wise, some other opportunities. And then we'll get into a quick overview of the new ADU grant program from DOLA before we hand it off to Ashley Chambers to learn about Grand Junction's exciting ADU production program, and then getting into what some folks might want to do with this new grant program. So quickly, I'll just highlight a few announcements, things to look out for to sign up for. And I will be covering the new ADU grant program in a few moments, but I do want to share that for this program that's opening on August 1st and closing on August 29th, we just released the program guidelines this past Friday, and we are hosting an informational session. So any grant-specific questions, anything about becoming eligible, what you could use the funds for that aren't answered today, please come on July 29th at 1 o'clock. We can answer every question you bring as best we can and hope to set you up for success for the program. My colleagues on my team are also hosting a Housing Action Plan Guidance webinar, which relates to Senate Bill 24-174 for any communities who are planning to update or develop a housing action plan. And those documents are due on January 1st, 2028. So if you're interested in learning what that all entails and how you could receive funding to do that work, come to that webinar on July 31st. I'll pass it off to Robin to discuss the local planning capacity grant program announcement.
Morning. We want to announce that the next funding cycle for the local planning capacity grant will open August 22nd with an application deadline of September 22nd. Apologies, the website's not updated, but it will be very soon. And we've just announced, set the date for a webinar that will precede that funding cycle on Thursday, August 14th at 11 a.m. The link to register for that webinar was just shared in the chat. And in that webinar, we will go over revised program guidelines that will also be published very soon as the website is getting updated. So please join us to learn more about the local planning capacity grant, which is Prop 123 funding, and how it can support your community's affordable housing efforts. Back to you, Mitch.
Thanks, Robin. Okay, as I mentioned, we're joined today by Ashley Chambers and Matt Lafferty. So I'll get through my portion of the grant program so that you can hear from these lovely folks at the local level. I'm going to quickly highlight our new grant program called the Accessory Dwelling Unit Grant Program that was established through House Bill 24-1152. This program can provide funding to accessory dwelling unit supportive jurisdictions for activities that promote the construction of ADUs. And as I mentioned earlier, the first round of this program opens August 1st and closes August 29th. We are anticipating additional rounds of funding, but that is entirely dependent on how much funding is left over after round one. And for those of you who are interested in this funding, House Bill 24-1152 also provided additional ADU funding through the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority that is equally tied to being an ADU supportive jurisdiction. And that funding is still under development, but should be ready in the next couple of months. So if you're interested in working on ADUs, promoting ADUs, this new grant program can fund quite a few things, but we've kind of divided them up into two categories. So there are planning activities. We've heard a lot of interest in developing pre-approved ADU design plans, developing an ADU incentive program like Grand Junction is going to talk about today, providing technical assistance to people converting or constructing ADUs at the local level. And then the financial assistance piece comes in waivers, reductions, or other financial assistance for ADU fees and other required costs. And you'll see that in HB 24-1152, the amount of financial assistance is strictly capped at $15,000 per ADU permitted by that local government. So I've tried to provide some details here. I know it's a little wonky, but in the law, it states that local governments can apply and request no more than 15,000 per the ADU permitted locally. So what we've done is we've set a time frame to make that make more sense. So for the purpose of the first round of the grant program, a local government can come in and ask for money for waivers and fees and other financial assistance for ADUs to apply to new ADUs, but that will be based on the ADU permits that happened within essentially the last year. So from May 13th, 2024, which is the effective date of the law, through August 29th, which is the end of the first round. So if you have had some ADUs permitted locally and you would like to incentivize more ADUs, come to us. The grant program will require documentation, proof of permits, but essentially you can come in and say, we'd like $15,000 times, we've permitted 3 ADUs. We'd like $45,000 to incentivize new ADU development, or whichever the equivalent amount is. And if you'd like to do that in tandem with creating pre-approved designs or setting up a program or the other items mentioned under planning activities, you can do that. The only piece to note is that there is a 25% match requirement for this grant program. So that's not to say you can't use a local housing partner, housing authority, or other group to come in and bring that match to the table. So if that provides some sort of financial hardship, reach out to DOLA staff and we can see what we might be able to do on the match end. But we do have a 25% commitment on this program. And as I mentioned, these funds are only for ADU supportive jurisdictions, and that term is outlined in the law. So we've got a couple bullets here about what that actually is. And there's quite a few communities who are subject in HB 24-1152, but then there's also the opportunity for folks and communities who are not subject to the law to opt in and essentially do the same thing that a subject jurisdiction would. One is submitting a report demonstrating compliance with the few requirements that come along with being a subject jurisdiction. So things like allowing or administering an administrative approval process for ADUs, requiring, and then some limitations on what you can and cannot do at the local level about ADUs. And additionally, that next step to becoming a supportive jurisdiction is something I'll outline in the coming slides. It really entails implementing at least one ADU supportive strategy, some of which Ashley may talk about today that Grand Junction has done. So I'll hit the next slide and kind of start highlighting what it could look like to be ADU supportive jurisdiction. So here's 4 of the 10. We've got the next shown on the next couple of slides. So these are the supportive strategies that are required before a community can unlock access to these DOLA and CHAFA ADU grant funds and loan funds. And CHAFA is probably going to do some sort of financing tools with various lenders so that your residents can have access to funds too. So there's kind of a 2-pronged approach. But together, CHAFA and DOLA have quite a bit of funds to support this work. So if you are interested, some of the supportive strategies are listed here, including waiving, reducing, or providing assistance for ADUs for low and moderate income households, enacting laws that incentivize affordability of ADUs, providing pre-approved plans, implementing an education and technical assistance program, implementing a program that regulates the use of short-term rentals for ADUs, enacting laws that incentivize the construction and conversion of accessible and visitable ADUs, assisting property owners with ensuring that pre-existing ADUs can comply with local laws, so bringing them up to compliance. And then the last 3 are enabling a pathway of a separate sale of an ADU, enacting local laws to encourage the construction of ADUs that are factory built, and then an other. So that would have to be something that you would reach out to staff about to make sure that it meets the kind of the intent and the impact of the other 9 strategies. And these are all called out in the law. And that's what we are required to look at as far as it goes for certifying an ADU supportive jurisdiction. So have some questions lined up. We've got some DOLA staff here to answer them when we get to the Q&A section. I do want to highlight the lovely DOLA staff who will be managing and overseeing this program, Jack Wolflink and Nicole Donovan. So you'll be seeing some communications from them in the coming weeks, knowing we've got round one coming out. And I know some of you are already familiar with Nicola as she's worked heavily on the 1271 grant program. So we will make all of this information available to you afterward, the contact info and kind of the guidelines, links to the webinar. So stay tuned. But for now, I'll pass it off to Ashley to discuss Grand Junction's ADU production program.
Good morning. Can you guys all hear me? Perfect. Well, thank you all for having me. I'm Ashley Chambers, as mentioned. I'm the housing manager for the city of Grand Junction. And today I'm talking a little bit about our ADU program. So we've developed a comprehensive program. Mitch, if you want to hit next slide for me. Our ADU process started a couple years ago, long before new legislation. And one of the things that we did is really develop a housing strategy as a city. And in that housing strategy, it was in the process of stakeholder support and all of those things. We actually had ADUs as sort of a very low-hanging fruit that our community really supported. But we realized there was a couple barriers to that. And so as we dove into those pieces, what we really found was that we needed to spend some time really developing some key areas, which included providing city council education. I'll dive into each one of these things specifically in just a moment. We needed to do some land use changes to make it easier. We created an ADU toolkit and workshops, as well as an ADU incentive program. Our housing strategy, we did an original strategy in 2021, and that included 13 strategies, one of which strategy 4 was encourage development of ADUs. And so this is really the first strategy we implemented as a city. As I mentioned, it was low-hanging fruit and one of the easiest as far as costs go to implement. In 2024, we did a strategy update, and with many of the new funding sources and opportunities and just the changing housing scene, we really wanted to update our strategy just to align with some of those things and also reflect the work that had already been done. And so because of that, we somewhat eliminated the ADU as a strategy, but actually kind of folded that into a strategy focused on just monitoring the programs we had already developed or expanding them as new opportunities arose. And so that now is kind of folded into our strategy 11. Next slide. When we began this program, we really identified that there were some key challenges in developing our program and looking at things. One was zoning. We had somewhat loosened restrictions, but that was a key area identified by folks who had already built ADUs in our community. We knew that financing and mechanisms was a challenge, but it wasn't actually, the bolded ones are the things that were really high scoring on what homeowners of those building ADUs had identified. So cost and fees was also a key part. Impact fees and those things end up being about 10 to 20% of the total cost of an ADU. And so that can be a big burden, especially many of those costs and fees are before folks get loans or financing mechanisms. And so having that money upfront is a challenge. And then really the biggest hurdle for us was the lack of experience by homeowners. We found that folks developing ADUs were not people who had a background in development. And because it was one unit, one time on their property, they were taking on a project that really was beyond their scope of understanding. And then also we did see a slight short-term rental, or at least a perceived short-term rental preference of ADUs, and wanted to make sure that if we were to develop and loosen or have a program, that we identified that as an area that we were going to create programming around. Next slide. So we really started initially educating our council. We spent 2 council workshops talking about code changes, really talking about housing continuum and housing needs and how ADUs sort of fit into this missing middle or naturally occurring. We talked about the benefits of ADUs and challenges. We looked at case studies from around the entire country, people who were doing this and what they had proven worked. And then we really talked about what we were proposing. As you can see here at the bottom graph, this is where we had surveyed about 60 people who had previously built ADUs and looked at, and I don't know why it cut off part of my my terms here, so I apologize. But we looked and proposed, like, if we made these changes, what would be the things that would most benefit you? You can see 100% of people said code changes. Many said toolkit and an incentive program at the bottom. There were our highest scores, and that's really where we spun our wheels and focused on. Next slide. So we initially rewrote our code. We've done this in 2023 in general, and then we updated in 2024 based on some new state guidelines. We really didn't have to change much in 2024, but we just adjusted some terminology. So you can see here, we allow ADUs now in single or two family dwelling units anywhere where single family is permitted, and we do not count them in our density requirements for the city. They're basically kind of, we call them ghost units, essentially. And then we also now allow up to 2 ADUs on properties. And so we allow 1 detached and 1 basically attached. And so that allowed folks to convert attics or basements or part of the unit. So we have several ADUs now in our community where it was a person with a large single family dwelling unit, so a 2,000 square foot home, and it's just them now living in their unit. And so taking a piece of that unit and creating an ADU is now an option, and it's not counted as a duplex. And so they are able to use our ADU incentive program to help reduce the costs and that. We also, as you can see in the bold in this next section, this is one of the changes that we made with our 2024 update to align with legislation. We also had originally reduced the parking space requirement and basically said, like, as long as there's a parking space near or street parking, and now we've just eliminated the whole entire parking space requirement with new legislation. We allow up to 900 square feet. That didn't change in our code at all. And then we did adjust some design and remove design requirements. Next slide. So the next thing we launched is ADU workshops. As mentioned, these are homeowners. They have not gone through a planning process or aware of the planning process. And so these workshops, our original intent was to launch 1 per quarter. And when we announced these and with a basic press release, we had so much interest that we ended up, I think, scheduling 6 additional workshops in the first 2 quarters because we'd hit our maximum capacity for the room and then schedule the next one, and immediately we'd have it full again. Since that time, we have done 1 per quarter, and every single time they are completely full. So we have not seen a reduction of interest in the last 3 years. And to date, we've hosted 11 workshops and had 275 participants. Our next one is in July, and we have already had 60 participants register for that and counting. So there is a huge interest in our community. What we do at our workshops is we go through our toolkit. It's basically our curriculum. We talk about how-to, we talk about why this is important to affordable housing. We do have a planning staff present, so we answer all these questions, and then we talk about our ADU production program. We actually launched a part 2. Many of the questions that we got in that first workshop were around financing, building, and developing itself and construction. None of those things our staff do in-house, and so we put together a panel of professionals. And so we have our building department and our a local construction manager, GC, and then we also have people who are in the financing side of ADU and loans. And so they come and people just ask them questions. On our July 29th workshop, we are adding an ADU resource fair. So we have invited many of those local firms, GCs who are building ADUs, and then other adjacent developers and like modular construction folks, and they're all setting up tables and having a resource fair so they can advertise to their constituents basically and people interested in ADUs, but we sort of are not recommending or saying these are the folks to do it. We just sent a broad invitation out to community members who are in that space. Next slide. So our toolkit is I think about 10 pages, and it holds a lot of information. It's basically a step-by-step guide for what you need to know or do to get your ADU constructed in our community. It talks about types of ADUs. It talks about financing mechanisms to explore, and it really talks about the process and and planning and building that you need to do. In addition, throughout it, we've created and sometimes borrowed from other areas across the country tools that we adjusted for our own local use. And so some of those things included a cost estimator. So when you scan that QR code in the toolkit, it opens up an Excel spreadsheet that autofills based on what they intend to spend and plan. It includes a site sketch worksheet and all the different things that folks may need adjacent to knowing the process. So if you want to go to the next slide for me, Mitch. So this is what the inside looks like. So it literally says step 1, here's what you need to do. Step 2, it gives you that overview of code that I showed you guys. It gives you the contact information for the folks they're going to need to contact at any phase of the development process. And if you go to the next slide for me. And these are some of the tools that if you scan QR codes, so it shows you what you need to have on your worksheet when you turn in your site sketch. It shows you, it gives you checklists of items to include. We found that this was the biggest hurdle for folks because they don't submit these types of plans. We were getting plans submitted on napkins at one point. We were, getting not to scale plans. And so this really gives like, hey, don't forget to show this, don't forget to do that. It also has our key codes that are requirements for the site sketch to show different easements, and it gives you, we built this, our housing staff are not planners. We had no idea what some of the terms in planning meant. And so we built this toolkit saying, if we don't know this, how are our general folks going to know this? And so we gave very clear, very basic definitions for things like drainage patterns and what do you need to show in these. And so we found that the barriers that people were having as far as submitting their plans significantly reduced. And actually most folks, originally when we did this, it was taking about 4 to 6 weeks to get through this process with our planning staff. And now some folks submit their plans and have them approved in 3 days. And so it is very quick and has reduced a lot of challenges in general for not only our staff, but also the folks submitting. Next slide. So we launched an ADU production program in 2023, and there are 2 tiers to our program. One is anyone in our community, whether they're a developer, a landowner, a property owner who's planning on just doing rentals, and that ADU developer can get their impact fees paid for on behalf of our housing division. So not officially waived, although they think it's a waiver, we pay those on their behalf. And in exchange, we ask that they use that ADU for 5 years for a long-term rental commitment. So, and that's not only the ADU, but also the other primary structure on the property. So all units on that property are long-term rentals. And in exchange, we will give them basically a 0 interest grant that pays itself off after 5 years. For this first tier, we don't require them to live on site. So it could be both units or long-term rentals. And so it's an opportunity to sort of expand their investment properties without needing to live on site. The second tier is only for those folks who own and live on the property. And we do have an income restriction of 140% AMI. So households have to be under that. In our community, honestly, though, that's like 98% of our community is under 140% AMI. So it's not it really just eliminates those who are owning properties as investments and really creates, the goal was that this creates a wealth generating opportunity for folks to stay in their own homes longer. We had a lot of folks building ADUs for their parents or for their kids. And so this created an opportunity for them either to rent out to maintain their housing or opportunities for their family to live on site. In exchange for that additional incentive, we ask that commitment to be a 7-year-long commitment for all units on their property to be a long-term rental. We pay for the impact fees, so about $9,050. And then the difference between that amount and $15,000, they get as a cash incentive to use towards whatever they want. So whether that's construction, whether that's financing fees. And what we have found is that when folks have that letter of approval, they can go to their banks, and actually it's basically seen as a down payment or an equity into that. And so they're getting reduced interest rates or those kinds of things on financing for their ADU. We do have, and we do put on their property, on their title, the agreement and the amount. And so it is optional. It stays with the property, not with the owner. And so if they decide to sell the property or terminate, it basically just triggers a repayment of those fees. And or there is an opportunity for them to negotiate at the point of sale for the next owner to continue on in the program for however long is left on the term. So if it was a 5-year and they sold it year 2, the new owner could take that up and finish out the 3-year term. We do have, as you can see here, the 2 tiers do have a termination fee as well as sort of an increase of what they're paying as they go through that program. And that's really to de-incentivize folks from removing this from their property before it's time. Partial years, we do offer proration. So, we're not going to charge somebody for the full year. And then at any point, there is a clawback feature. So we do have an opportunity to reclaim these funds. And then also this basically acts, if someone is selling or in foreclosure or those things, this must be paid before any other debts are paid as well. Next slide. Since initiating these strategies, our community saw 17 ADUs per year average. Our 2024 number, which was our first year of a full program implementation, we saw that number increase to 34 overall permitted ADUs. And so we saw a 100% increase in ADU production. Those were just permitted ADUs. And so the ADUs that applied for our program in our first year in 2023, which was a partial year, we saw basically 6 ADUs use that ADU production program. In 2024, we had 21 of the 34 use our ADU production program. 19 of those were tier 1. Only 2 were that tier 2 program. And then in 2025, to date, we have approved or have pending approval 13 ADUs. 7 tier 1, and you'll notice that homeowners are now utilizing these tools, and we've seen 6 so far to date as of, I think this was July 10th that I put these numbers together. We have budgeted for this program $250,000 out of our general fund dollars, just as housing programming. Last year, we actually went over that and went back to council and asked for some additional funds. This year, we think we're going to run out of this $90,000 by the end of September. So we are so glad this grant is rolling out at the time that it is, so that we have an opportunity to expand those funds. And so that's really where we're looking to next. We are very excited about the grant opportunity. So we're looking at expanding that just baseline for our tier 1 and tier 2 incentives. We're currently, as I mentioned, we don't have, or I didn't really mention, but I should have, is that our ADU incentive program does not have a rental limitation. So we don't have a maximum rent folks can charge on their ADU. Right now, because it was a pilot program, we've been collecting that data. We do require at any new lease that's signed on those units, they have to submit a form that basically just gives us a copy of their lease. And that way we can kind of see what the rental rates are going for. And so this was something that we would be like further evaluating if we wanted to have maximum rents or base rents on AMI. We have not seen a huge like price of those units. They're naturally occurring. We wanted them to continue. However, we're currently exploring the possibility of adding a 3rd tier incentive program that maybe would incentivize folks to rent to 60% AMI and under. And so not sure how that plays out yet, but looking at maybe a reimbursement for a part of reclaiming of those loss of rental funds. And so we're, like I said, we're still exploring this, but that is one of the things we have on our mind to expand our program. And I will say adjacent to our ADU program, we actually do have a landlord and tenant incentive program that provides tenant education and landlord education. And so this could kind of slide into a kind of a merge of a few components of those programs and be an opportunity to help ADU homeowners really understand what it looks like to be a good landlord, and have their tenants become good tenants as well. The other thing is, and we were intending to use grant funds to develop some approved plans. However, one of our local GCs, who's probably the one who's building the most ADUs in this community, came to us and said, I'd be willing to provide you our plans that we use and have constructed in this community, in exchange that my name just gets printed on them as sort of marketing materials, and you guys don't have to pay us for these. And so they actually, as of this week, provided us with 8 approved plans that they've already developed and have pictures of units they've built in our community, and are basically giving those to us. And all that's on there is their logo and basically credit that they've given us these plans. And so we do not have to go after some additional funds for this, but we're excited to roll that out. We're looking at that rollout happening in August when we announce our fall workshop schedule, so that we can kind of double announce at the same time and use our press releases for some fun adventures there. So yeah, that's all I have for you guys today.
Hey, thanks so much, Ashley. I'm excited to learn more about those pre-approved design plans. It doesn't happen so often where you get gifted that many of, something that's in such need. So have to let us know how that goes.
Yeah, we were anticipating them giving us 2 and they sent over 8, and we were like, whoa. So
Wow.
it's kind of a surprise to us as well.
Well, fantastic. Well, folks, please have your questions in the chat, or just keep them ready. Once we're done with our portion here, we'll open it up to Q&A. But before we do that, I want to hand things off to Matt Lafferty, the principal planner of Larimer County, to talk about what the county intends to apply for grant funding for.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. Matt Lafferty, principal planner of Larimer County, and Ashley, thanks for a great presentation. That was very thorough, and Larimer County is just entering into this whole process of becoming a supportive community and looking to enter into the grants program. And it's great to see other communities and how they've accomplished this. I'd like to spend just a couple of moments talking about some nuances, though. Grand Junctions, and we've spoken with Denver and other communities. They tend to be large city communities and have a lot of other issues going on with ADUs, spacing requirements, other things like that. It's a whole lot different when you start talking about ADUs and the availability of them and things as it relates to rural counties. Larimer County is a rural county. Our comprehensive plan suggests that we focus our energies on moving housing into urban environments and creating density where local resources are available, rather than developing the rural environment. However, there's plenty of opportunity for putting ADUs in a rural environment. We found that it might work very well with some of our ag communities, providing ag labor housing, other strategies to help out in different areas of our community that are rural in nature. And so I hope to suggest to people or counties out there that are rural in nature that ADUs don't have to be just an urban environment type thing. They can actually support rural communities and provide a benefit. So Larimer County is entering into that process, and I want to thank Hannah Van Nimwegen. We are going down the process of becoming a supportive community, and thought we had it all in place, read the laws, did all this stuff, went to hearings to get our code changed. And then I met with Hannah a couple weeks ago, and she pointed out some things in there that we were not doing correctly. And so we had to go back and do some quick modifications to our land use code as it relates to ADUs and how we were going to provide them, to make sure that we would be considered a supportive community and then be able to be eligible for applying for the grant funds. So thanks to that, I use those resources. If you don't use those resources, you might find that you're going to get all the way down the path and have to back up multiple steps. And that's a big waste of everybody's time and energy. So use those resources. For Larimer County, we're taking a fairly simplistic approach. We went in to our land use code and just made ADUs a use by right. It's allowed, it's permitted everywhere in the county. You just need to go seek building permits and make sure that you comply with the subtle requirements that are allowed by that, meet setbacks and some of the bulk requirements that go into providing additional units on your property. We consider them an accessory use. They don't They can't be used for short-term rentals. That's one of the things that qualified us. The other thing was that we streamlined the process. We're looking to seek some of the grant funding to come up like Grand Junction and create some handouts and other materials that will help guide our community through stuff. But we're really looking to come up with grant funding to help support our needs to help people with their permitting fees and maybe some of their financing costs so that we can move them into an affordable housing arrangement. And that would help us to qualify some of our needs on our Prop 123 requirements to come up with affordable housing within our 3-year cycle. And so as a rural county, we don't get a lot of affordable housing, and given our past, we have to come up with 113 units. That doesn't sound like much, but when you only get maybe 50 or 60 new housing units a year in your community, it's hard to come up with those affordable housing unit numbers. And so we're looking at maybe ADUs being that way. So if we can move people into deed restricted arrangements for a period of time, at least to meet our 123 requirements, then that's our objective, is to do that. It's also to help people to start achieving opportunities for building these on their property, just to support local needs and whatnot. We find that our rural community, primarily our ag community, has a real hard time in finding financing and other opportunities to build affordable housing, not only for their families, but for ag labor housing and those types of things. And so we're looking to reach out and see how that might fit and meet our needs. So I really appreciate Ashley's comments. That was very thorough. I think she covered most everything I would want to cover. And I'm hoping that stock plans and some of those types of things that communities like Grand Junction we can crib off of, and maybe we could find ways to share resources. And maybe that's part of this whole grant funding program, is that, maybe we can use some of the funding to acquire pre-approved stock plans that have already been approved in other communities. And then it becomes more of a state open, wide availability of stock plans. And so with that, I'm going to open it up. We have about, looks like 20 minutes for question and answers. So I'll turn it back over to Mitch and take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. And I'm looking through the chat now, and I don't want to miss any original comments. I think going back, we had a comment from Matt Frommer. I believe this was reaching out to Ashley about, what do you mean by not counted by density requirements? Do these neighborhoods have density caps?
So our zoning has minimum density and maximum density for different zones. So for example, if it's R2, you can have 2 units per acre. And so an ADU would not count in that. So you could actually have 2 primary structures plus ADUs on both, if that makes sense. So they just don't count in the density at all.
County similar in that case, that we made it an accessory use, so it's not counted as density in any way.
Yep, same. So that was their accessory use.
Great. It looks like we're getting a couple more. I know some of these were while Ashley was speaking, so I believe this one's also for Ashley. How are the long-term rental commitments for the ADUs being monitored and managed by the city? How is it being checked for compliance? Is it annually at the termination or release?
Yeah, so as I kind of mentioned, we go over this in our workshops, but essentially the compliance piece is that once it's rented, so we do put a hold, I should have mentioned this, we put a hold on the certificate of occupancy. We have a 12-month build requirement after they get their planning clearance. And so we kind of monitor and just say, okay, you're approaching your 12-month, how are things going? And they have to get a hold of us to remove that hold so that we're kind of monitoring that 12-month period. We've only run into that a couple times where people needed an extension for various reasons, supply or, construction delays, those kinds of things. But we're able to remove the hold on their CO and issue it. And then that triggers for us knowing that within the next 60 to 90 days that we need to have a lease on that property. Usually it's much faster because units don't sit empty in our community. And so we require that there's a lease, whether that's to a family member and the rental amount is 0, or it's an actual like market, piece of a lease where they're renting to a stranger, we require a lease on that unit, whether it's, the family is moving in the ADU and renting the primary structure or vice versa. And so anytime there's a new lease, so even if it's a 6-month lease, every 6 months, they should be submitting a lease. And we just sort of, when we get those lease agreements, we're putting on kind of a master spreadsheet when we need to check back in with them and that lease ends. If there is just a regular standard year lease, then every year they have to submit a form and a copy of the lease that just says, we're still under this lease. These are the terms. This is who it's leasing to. And then periodically we've sent a letter to the tenant or called the tenant and just confirmed that they're still renting and those kinds of things. So the compliance hasn't been too burdensome. It's really just an email about a month before that term lease just to remind them it's due, and then just a follow-up email usually. And we've had pretty good success. No one's been bothered. We're seeing most of our units with leases. So
Thanks. And Matt, I know you'd mentioned you'd be hoping to use ADU grant funds to support some affordable ADUs. Does the county have something similar in place for how the county may manage those long-term rental commitments?
No, that's what we're gonna have to figure out if we can get the grant funding to help us set it up. We'll probably move into deed restriction senses, and then we're just gonna have to build a mechanism for managing and monitoring how those are being used and that they're being compliant with the terms of those deed restrictions.
Great, thanks. We've got a few questions in the Q&A too, and separate from the chat. And Ashley, I believe this question is for you and the city's program. Are there any income limitations for the homeowner that comes with the funding? For example, no more than 35% debt to income ratio, like the down payment program for Prop 123, or is it just the 140% AMI limitation?
yeah, we don't, because this is a grant, we're not monitoring their debt to income ratio. And now because of financing changes, folks can count the potential rental income on that ADU. And so a lot of times that debt to income ratio isn't as applicable as it used to be in the past, because they're counting on that rental income to be that piece now, instead of it looking as, I mean, it is their debt to income, but it's also their revenue is increased as well. And so we don't look at that at all. We are not financiers in any way, shape, or form. We're just providing a grant and just verifying that they're under that AMI.
Thanks. And there's a couple more, so bear with me. We've got some great questions in both sections. This next one is, does the city of Grand Junction pay the housing fees, or are they a waiver, or is it the city forgoes the fees? And the question is, if the housing division pays, what type of funding do you have to support paying for those fees?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we've been budgeting about 250,000 a year. And so we actually do an internal transfer. So the housing division's 250,000 budget goes into our impact fee and pays those. So essentially our planning techs who manage that piece call us and say, hey, this planning clearance is ready to be picked up. Is this an approved in the program? And we give the stamp of approval, and then they submit that to our finance department, and it's just an internal transfer, and they release the clearance to the family. So we do make sure that covenant agreement is on their property, on their title, before we do that. And so yeah, usually we have not waived those fees, we've just paid them on their behalf.
Okay, thanks. And this next question might be for both of you, just more general about parking. Are you finding any issues at either the county or the local city level with parking in the ADUs you're seeing built?
From the county's perspective, we haven't initiated it yet far enough to know that that's going to be a problem, but we're dealing with larger lots. Typically, we're dealing with properties that are acre, 2 acre, 10 acres, 35 acres. So parking shouldn't be a problem in most of our situations as it relates to that. But as we move into the urban areas where we share growth management objectives with our municipal agencies, it might present a problem, but that you're not going to be able to provide parking on lot. But I had to imagine that we're going to have enough space in our streets and whatnot to have a problem with that.
Yeah, I'll say we haven't seen a problem at all. We have kind of, we have both like bigger lots properties. We aren't seeing as many ADUs being built on those. We're more seeing ADUs in our downtown core, which is definitely more urban feel. And so it's smaller lot sizes in general where parking spaces become a challenge to create. But people just use street parking. Or a lot of folks who live in ADUs don't have cars. So we have a fairly bikeable community, walkable downtown. And so we're just not seeing a huge parking issue in general. Now, if depending on who you ask in our community, they'll tell you that we have a parking problem, but every parking study we've said so that we're only utilizing about 30% of our parking in the community. So it's more just I can't park sometimes in front of my house and have to park like 5-10 feet behind my house, and I don't like that. So yeah, it's not really been an issue in our community thus far.
Thanks. Thanks both of you for that. We've got a few more in the chat. I see one is related to the cost of ADUs in Grand Junction. There was some props to the city for such great work and progress so far. And the question is really just general curiosity about how much it costs to build an ADU and whether they're financially viable given the interest rates of today. And are the average rents folks are getting enough to cover the monthly construction loan payments?
Well, I'm assuming so. I've never officially asked our homeowners. But I do know we, in our ADU toolkit, we do provide and have asked multiple GCs who we see building ADUs what their average cost is, and we do provide that for homeowners. So we're seeing, depending on the size, if it's 300 to 500 square feet, the project cost is about 100,000 to 133,000. If a larger ADU between 800 and 900 square feet is, between 150 to 200,000. Of course, it really depends on finishes, and I think that's where a lot of folks, are putting in huge amount of crazy finishes, and so they'll be at the top of that or even higher. But also, I think one thing that our community, at least homeowners, have is their equity right now is exponentially grown in the last few years. And so I think a huge part of that is just the ability to cover, at a lower interest rate. And I think some of these funds that we have available have been able to be used to drive down that interest rate or pay off a couple points. So I think we're seeing average, it depends on the size of the ADU and how many bedrooms, but I was just looking as you guys were kind of answering some other questions. For the rental agreements we've got back in the recent year, most of our ADUs are renting between 800 being the lowest or $0 to families, but the ones who are actually charging rent is between 800 and 1,500, and our max size is 900 square feet. So I would imagine that yes, it is covering that price point for interest rates.
Talking about the cost of these things, there's multiple costs. So you're going to have your building permitting costs, but you're also going to have the construction costs. And a lot of people then look at that as the value of what they're doing. So, what's going to cost me $150,000 put an ADU on my lot? What's forgotten though is the utility component that goes into it. And we find up here in Larimer County that, we deal with water districts a lot, and some of the water districts require you to purchase separate taps. Some of them require you to supplement your taps. And those costs, can be $60,000, $70,000 of additional fees going just for getting your water tap or that. If you're in a rural environment, sometimes you got to put in a septic system, and it can be $30,000, $40,000 if you're going to be in an area where it needs a well. Wells are $30,000, $40,000 to drill if you're lucky. So there's some other costs that go into there, and I think that's the thing that's probably important to those toolkits is to understand your community and the different factors that are going to come in and impact the cost of those. I know I've had a couple of people that I've spoken to since we started this process, and they come in thinking, I can build one of these for $150,000 to $175,000 because they're looking at the construction costs, and then the minute they go out and talk to something, it jumps up real quickly into the $200,000-300,000 mark. And then, that prices some people out, and we're looking for opportunities to slim that down. So, um, stock plans where people don't have to pay big building permit fees and stuff, so that they could be spending their money on the things that are going to provide value to the use.
Thank you both for the clarity there. I know with the uncertainty in the rates right now, it's kind of a tricky time. This next question is actually going to go to Hannah. The question is from Nicole. It says, would setback laws uphold for existing unattached garages that are being converted?
And that's a great question. So HB 24-1152 says that for a newly constructed ADU, the setbacks that are required cannot exceed what would be required for an accessory structure or for the primary structure, depending on the type of ADU that is proposed. However, for an existing structure, that would largely depend on the existing jurisdiction's handling of legal non-conforming structures. So since there's so many variables with that potential scenario, I would really appreciate being able to talk with this person offline, just to make sure that I was giving them correct advice, just because I mean, we all know with zoning codes, there's so many ways things can be interpreted. And so I would hate to push or to point in an incorrect direction. My email address is just my first name dot my last name at state.co.us. I'll put it in the chat, but you can also submit a question through our Ask a Question portal, and I'll put that in there as well.
Thanks, Hannah. And for everyone who's on the call who's interested in becoming a supportive jurisdiction or just meeting the subject jurisdiction requirements, please reach out to Hannah and our technical assistance team so they can help you out and get you ready to be eligible for round one. We just have, I think, 2 or 3 more questions. Looks like for the city of Grand Junction, has the city allowed or considered allowing people to sell the ADUs to increase home ownership?
I don't really have a great answer for that. I think that is complicated, and I think the way that would work is probably in the way that
my screen is frozen.
The way that a townhome is achieved. We have never been asked that question, so I'm not sure in this community if that would be of interest. It's not something we've explored, but yet to be determined, I suppose.
Thanks, and sorry for my internet being choppy. We've just got a few more questions, but please keep adding them to the chat if something has come up. This question is anyone being charged for additional utility connections for ADUs, or are those not being added in this case for both the county and the city?
That's the issue with the county, is we don't control utility. So we're not a water provider, we're not a sewer provider. So whatever district or agency that they have to comply with those water requirements or sewer requirements, they have to go pay for those fees and do that. As far as our transportation impact fees and things like that, we look to minimize them, but we still account for them having to meet those fees. But hopefully we can use some of the grant funding to offset some of those costs.
I will say that for us, an administrative decision we made was that ADUs do not require a separate tap on our water system, because as long, most of our, especially because it's downtown, there's already the infrastructure and they're already, there's not really a huge increase of use on those. As far as electricity, we don't manage that. So that really is dependent on if their current system can support it. That is one of the things the GC looks at. And I should clarify, the price quotes I gave you are not just construction, that's all included. So that's usually inclusive of those tap fees or those, we don't see a lot of wells where we're at. So that's not, we have a little bit different challenges than that, but the, all of those fees are included in that. So I don't think that we see a huge, unless they're adding separate meters for electricity. I think most of our homes, especially in the downtown core, could support that additional unit And so it's really just the cost of adding those lines and those connections. But I think that's a little bit unique, maybe for a more urban environment versus rural, for sure.
Thanks, Ashley. And looks like that's all for the questions. There is a comment from Matt that says, thanks for the answer on cost and info about tap fees. We heard Louisville is looking at eliminating water tap fees for ADUs, and they suggested that ADUs might actually consume less water than the turf that they replace. So interesting, and we'll keep an eye out for updates on that. I want to flag that these recordings and the slides will be available in the coming weeks, and we are working on future sessions next month on August 21st, same time, same day of the week, Thursdays at 9. Will be local financing strategies. In September, Robin will be talking about fast track implementation, and in October we're pending, but we believe we might be discussing housing affordability strategies as they relate to Senate Bill 24-174 and those housing action plan requirements. So stay tuned for what's coming next, but we've got a couple great sessions here in the next few months. So that's it. That's what we've got for you today. Thank you all for your attendance and your thoughtful questions. We finished almost right on time, and I thought we were going to end early. So thanks for being engaged and passionate about affordable housing and ADUs. Hope you have a great week, and please reach out to us with any questions about the grant program and or becoming a subject or a supportive jurisdiction for ADUs. Thanks and take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt and Ashley. Really appreciate it.